Hi everyone, Alan here with Discovering Buddhism. Welcome. We're starting a new topic today, how to develop Bodhichitta. Very important topic, interesting topic. So we'll look at the notes and things in a minute, but let's just do 5 minutes of mindfulness meditation to calm ourselves and get in the right frame of mind. So get comfortable. Okay. Coming into our body and mind, what's happening inside. I think we're letting go our busy day, the outside world. We've got this amazing opportunity to spend an hour and a half together doing some studying of the Dharma, doing some practice. Rejoice. How few people can do this or want to do this. Extraordinary opportunity to study the Buddha's teachings. Remember, our motive is not just for our own benefit, this practice, but to benefit those around us and ultimately all sentient beings. The Mahayana motivation. Coming into our body, making sure we're comfortable on the chair or the floor, evenly balanced. Shoulders relaxed, back straight. Eyes can be closed or just gently open. And just observing the gentle rhythm of the breath, the breathing, the way the breath enters and leaves the body. Nothing to control, nothing to change, just watching. Just watching the abdomen rising and falling, or focusing at the nostrils, the most convenient, comfortable place to focus on the breath. Just checking now and again, are we still on the breath? Or have we wandered off? That's called introspection. If we notice we've been distracted, just relax, just a thought, let it go. Patiently come back to the breath. Okay, so I sent out the, first of all, there's a course outline which just says what's happening for the next 4 weeks. I do tend to change these sometimes as we go along, so it's just a rough guide. Probably the first week will be fairly accurate, I hope. So 4 weeks on Bodhichitta, the big topic, but it actually comes up in just about every other topic as well. We do. Of the reading list, always the first thing is the readings, which are a collection of teachings, about 50 or 60 pages. And there are, what have I got, 6 articles here. They're by Lama Yeshe, one by Lama Yeshe, 3 by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, one by His Holiness Kapte Ling Rinpoche, who was the Dalai Lama's senior tutor, and one by Geshe Rabden. Geshe Rabden was one of Lama Zopa's main gurus. So they're all very good. I started with I haven't read them all yet. Maybe you haven't either. I'm sure you haven't. There's a lot of reading. The first one's really good to start with. It's only, 5 pages? 4 or 5 pages by Lama Yeshe. It's just so good because he has a way of just using plain, not too much Buddhist language, and just going straight to the point. Very powerful teaching. And Ling Rinpoche's teaching is also quite short. It's only 6 pages, but also very concise, slightly more formal than Lama Yeshe's, but it's very exact and covers the field very well. And Lama Zopa's teachings are wonderful. Just on that, there's actually a book that came out last year called Bodhichitta. That's the second item on the reading list by Lama Zopa. It's a collection of all his teachings on Bodhichitta. Holding it up to the screen. So that's quite easy to get, I think, online. I'm sure you could get it digitally as well. It's from Wisdom Books, and edited by Gordon McDougall. Gordon McDougall, who's one of Rinpoche Lama Zopa's, one of his very close students, disciples, and a very senior student. Speaks very, very learned, speaks Tibetan, and he's done an amazing job. Actually, the date is 2019. It was published, so it's a great book to have. So I'm probably using that even more than the readings, but the readings have things in more condensed form, probably. This is probably more at the, if you're thinking of university, more at the master's level rather than the undergraduate, or maybe even the doctorate. And then thinking of the doctorate, the one by His Holiness the Dalai Lama Tupten Shodden in Praise of Compassion. That's that series that's coming out by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, teaching the whole of the Lama to Westerners, specifically to Westerners. So that's actually just one full book on compassion, Bodhichitta, and that's very comprehensive. It covers beginning sort of stages, but then it goes right into the history of all the texts and looks at the Theravada teachings, what His Holiness calls the Pali tradition. His Holiness said instead of calling the schools Mahayana and Theravada, he says he prefers to call them Pali, which is the Theravada tradition, and Sanskrit for the Mahayana tradition. It's just very good because it's just looking, it still sort of distinguishes the two schools, but without this sort of, sometimes there's a lot of politics read into the words, Mahayana and Theravada and so on. So that's a good one, but that's quite good to have, particularly for further reading. Yangtze Rinpoche Practicing the Path, which is like the standard text we're using for most of the topics in discovering Buddhism. Very good book. It's also the whole of the Young Lama Talk to Westerners. Yangtze Rinpoche, very senior Tibetan monk, one of Lama Zopa's, not student, but he's a student of Lama Zopa. I don't think he was a teacher of Lama Zopa in a previous life. I'm not sure about that. Tukpan Jinka, Fearless Heart. So that's a really, Tukpan Jinka is His Holiness's, was his main translator for many years when he was travelling around the West, probably in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. Then he disrobed and became a teacher, I think he's Oxford, teaching Tibetan Buddhism, and also he runs a class. He works with the University of, it's either Harvard or one of those big universities in America, at the psychological part, doing clinics, working on depression, and using the Dharma to actually treat people with various different mental conditions. And so he wrote this book. It's partly his history of his life and partly a guide to meditation, particularly compassion meditation. Great book, Fearless Heart. So, and then the last one, Sharon Salzberg, yes. So she's a Pali Theravadan practitioner from the Insight Meditation group, and very senior nun. She's a very good writer, and a good teacher. But I must confess that I actually haven't read that book. I think I don't even know whether I've got it. But, anyway, it's slightly different approach. So, and then there's lots and lots of other books as well on compassion and Bodhichitta. So basically tonight we're looking really at the concept and the terms and so on. So I sent the notes, what have we got, 4 pages for tonight. So we're just going to look at things like how it fits into the rest of the teachings. Lama Zopa does that quite well. What's the meaning of Bodhichitta, the definitions and so on. The benefits of Bodhichitta. So Lama Zopa covers that very meticulously in his book. And then how to practice Bodhichitta, which is probably the main things we'll do next week out for the rest of the classes. But we might just start on equanimity tonight, which is like the preparation for the other practices, the Bodhichitta practices, compassion practices. Okay, so just see how we get through all this. Okay, so we've just done the Four Noble Truths in the last module, particularly the truth of suffering, and true suffering, true causes of suffering, true cessation, true paths, the Four Noble Truths. And so Lama Zopa starts off with it in his book, as His Holiness always starts off, all beings want happiness. Nobody wants suffering. Okay, so he says, if we're going shopping, we actually look at the fruit very carefully to make sure we don't get a bad one. We always sort of pick the best thing that we can find on the shelf. Make sure there's no bruising or imperfections, which is what we do. We're looking for the best. But then he says, when it comes to happiness, we're not educated or schooled enough to be able to find the best happiness. And of course, the Buddhist path is enlightenment as being the ultimate happiness. And he says to get there, you've got to have the mind of bodhicitta, the mind of compassion. So that's the highest form, the gateway to the best form of happiness, complete eternal bliss, no going back, is through compassion, bodhicitta. And he says this is almost unknown by ordinary people, because he's basically saying, because if they haven't sort of studied the more elementary practices in Buddhism, such as the Four Noble Truths, suffering, impermanence, etc., then they won't be able to sort of even know what compassion is. It's true. If you haven't, particularly he points out that if you just haven't studied all the three types of suffering, you probably think everything is just when you get sick of suffering, when you stub your toe, maybe if you get a disease, and of course you will die. But that's only the beginning of suffering, as we know from the three types of suffering. We're told that even what we think is the happiness, which is what we're all chasing, which is, one says it's not real happiness at all, barking up the wrong tree, that actually is inherently suffering because it can't last. It's all it's doing is actually it's relieving the suffering for a little while, and then it can't, by nature, give us lasting, blissful happiness as enlightenment can. So this is sort of a little bit of the background he talks about in the introduction to the book on Bodhichitta. So we can, if we don't start to have some background, and we can't really understand Bodhichitta. So I don't know how other people. The word baffled me when I first heard it. And interestingly, Gordon MacDougall, who edited the book, he says in his preface that when he first met the Buddhist teachings and heard about Bodhichitta, he just thought it's just impossible, for someone's mind to actually be that compassionate. That he realised that this is what is needed, but he couldn't really fathom how his own mind could become that. At the beginning, this is when he first met Buddhism many years ago. So how to make other beings more important than ourselves, and how to take responsibility, because the essence of Bodhicitta is to become enlightened so that we can lead other beings out of suffering to enlightenment, by ourselves alone, taking full responsibility and not leaving one being out, not even the worst of the Hitlers or the Pol Pots or the whatever's, mass killers, and so not leaving out one, treating them all as equally deserving our loving kindness. So it is incredible. Then, fortunately, we're not in a vacuum, because if you are lucky enough to meet or see people like Lama Zopa or His Holiness the Dalai Lama, you can actually get an inkling that there's something very extraordinary about them. They're human beings in form, but there's something sort of superhuman being about them. This compassion, Bodhicitta, is part of it. So that helps to convince ourselves that they were unenlightened beings at one stage like us. So the teachings are that everyone can, they practice the path, can obtain this ultimate blissful eternal happiness of enlightenment, which is the most beneficial for others as well as being for ourselves. So, the actual Sanskrit word, just to be a bit academic, Bodhi means awakening, and Chitta means the mind or the heart of awakening, the mind of awakening, the awakening mind. So a bodhisattva is a being with an awakening mind, enlightenment mind. The mind of enlightenment is called Sankara, mind of enlightenment. So that's aspiring to, as Rinpoche says, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, there's two types. I'm just jumping down a bit. We all have to, unless we're actually born as bodhisattvas, which bodhisattvas are people who have compassion spontaneously, then we have to start with the effortful bodhicitta. It's like simulated, contrived, where we actually use reasoning to convince ourselves that this is good for our mind. And so we pretend that we have compassion. And then it sounds silly, but once you familiarize yourself with the practice of compassion, loving kindness, it becomes more natural. And so you can move to the effortless bodhicitta, the spontaneous. And he gives the example of the effortful bodhicitta is just licking the sugar from the sugar cane, and the effortful is tasting the cane. So we just get a taste with the effortful, and then by familiarising himself, becoming more and more adept and expert at it, he digest and become the bodhicitta. So also, Rinpoche points out that there's two parts to the mind of bodhicitta. One is, he talks about aspiration, the wish to free all beings from suffering. And the second part is to attain enlightenment, to do that. Seeing that, of course, implied in that is knowing that beings are suffering and all the different types of suffering that they are going through. And then wishing to free them from that. And then, of course, being confident enough to be able to think that we can attain that. Okay? And then the only way to really relieve them from suffering is to become an enlightened being, omniscient, like the Buddha. The Buddha can actually see how everybody's mind exists, can see all phenomena, and so he can see what's needed. Each individual mind is different, and you can see what needs to be done for each individual. Can provide help for all those beings become enlightened. He can't transplant his realization and save us without us doing any effort. But he can lead us, leading to enlightenment, lead us through the Buddha Dharma Sangha, the teachings, the Dharma, and the teachers, the Sangha, who are teaching the Dharma. Leaving none out, leaving no sense of being out, and fully developing mind's positive qualities. He says this is not just an emotional feeling, but it's actually one of the main minds that the person who's on the path of being a bodhisattva, his mind is partly, until he becomes full bodhisattva and Buddha, it's part of that person's thinking. We call it the main mind, part of the consciousness of the mind. There's five sense consciousness, and the sixth one's mental consciousness, and so it's part of that mental consciousness. So maybe I've just got a little bit about how Western culture deals with compassion, a little bit about that. Some of this came from Thupten Jinpa's book, which is quite interesting. So it's very much, if you think how much is even in Western psychology, Rinpoche points this out. If you read psychology books, there's not really anything about compassion. One of our speakers at the happiness conference a few years ago was a top psychologist, and he said they used a computer to find if there's any mention of compassion in psychology textbooks being used in America. And I think they found up to a certain date, and I'm not sure what it was, but just recently, probably in this century, there was no mention of compassion in any psychology books at all. And I think they part explain this because really they're looking at sort of abnormalities and dealing with minds that are dysfunctional. And if people can just do normal everyday tasks, they're normal. So there's no sort of mention that compassion could have a play a part in it. But now there's this research, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, when he's talking about this topic, always mentions how they're now really seeing how incredibly important compassion and love is for the child from the moment they're born. And so that there's a need for that child to feel nurtured and experience the compassion of the mother. And without that, they do studies over many years, the child doesn't develop properly usually, and there's obviously going to be problems later on in life. So this incredibly important beginning of life to receive compassion, loving kindness of the mother. And same, and also with animals, they've actually done it with animals as well. So it's really quite interesting, quite shocking test where they take away the mother, from monkeys and so on, and watch how they suffer. So they do. It's been some really terrible. They wouldn't be allowed to do it nowadays with animal rights and so on. It's probably in the 30s, 40s, 50s they were doing this sort of test. So nowadays they can do brain mapping and scanning with computers, and Matthieu Ricard is often used as you might have heard him. He's a French monk who is very good at teaching and practicing mindfulness meditation, single point meditation, and he's incredibly. He's done an enormous amount of compassion work in setting up schools and so on in Tibet and Nepal. So enormous amount of practical help, but he's often used as a subject when Western scientists are trying to see what the effect of meditation is on the brain. And he spoke at one of our conferences, and he pointed out the difference between empathy and compassion. Empathy being feeling other people's pain and suffering, and just empathizing with them. Just understand, you've just lost a loved one, feeling that, being with them with their grief. Person's might got some really bad news about their health or something. So he said, by practicing empathy only, and they mapped his mind when he was doing it over many hours and days and weeks when he's in the lab. If he just practiced empathy, actually, after a while, his whatever the waves are that they measure for being, happy or well balanced, went down. But if he practiced compassion, which is feeling empathy but also having the wish to do something about it, so going to the next stage, what can I do to help? Empathy is just stopping at the feeling, the pain. It's feeling, and then compassion, wanting to relieve the pain, thinking of ways and wishing that person didn't have that suffering. So that's when the graph went way up, and his mindfulness, clarity of mind, all the positive aspects of his mind were mapped as being going off the chart virtually. So I thought that was really interesting, and he's written, I think, a book or two about this as well, the difference between empathy and compassion. But empathy is a good starting point. You usually need that to start off with, but the importance of taking it further. The globalization now is inevitable, and so that's another reason to think less about our own individual needs as nation, and extending out to things like helping if another country is suffering a coup like Myanmar is at the moment, or human rights abuses, natural disasters and so on. And of course, classic situation now, the COVID virus, it can only be treated by international approach. Boundaries just irrelevant. So all these observations now helps to emphasise the importance of compassion, and that psychologists are catching up. According to the I'm not a psychologist, but according to what I hear from psychologists, that they've ignored this important aspect of the human mind, compassion, loving kindness, as being a very vital component to people's mental health. Even Darwin there, I'm amazed, he says how social instincts such as serve, help and sympathise. So, interesting. So that's just a little bit about the Western approach. They're catching up to the Tibetans or to the Mahayanas, and a lot to learn from the Tibetan tradition, Mahayana tradition. Importance of that to mental health, loving kindness, compassion. So do feel free to observe or comment. There's nobody. There's a couple of people watching. Excuse me, what's to the drink? Okay, so let's just have a look at this Mahayana Buddhism, very good at lists. It's a list of 10 points as to why compassion bodhicitta is so important in the practice of Buddhism or path. And I'll just have a look. The page number I've got there is the page of Lama Zopa's textbook, Bodhichitta. Yeah, beside me for some reason. So this is like the traditional presentation of the benefits. The sole gateway to the Mahayana path. Sole gateway, so there's no other way. If you want to become or are a Mahayana Buddhist, practicing the Mahayana path, then compassion is a necessity. I'll call it bodhicitta. So Lama Zopa gives the example of a tree. The trunk is the bodhicitta of the tree being the path to enlightenment. So no other qualities, patience, generosity, single-pointed concentration, etc., and understanding the nature of reality can't make any progress with that unless we have compassion. So, so this bodhicitta is the two accumulations, they call it, method and wisdom. So in the Mahayana tradition, you need both. Method is the actions, which is compassionate action, bodhicitta action, and wisdom is understanding how things exist, understanding emptiness. Wisdom realizing emptiness, that nothing has any inherent existence. So without both of those, then we won't be able to take off, fly with the two wings to enlightenment. So this is sort of the heart of the path, the two things. So this is the compassionate side. And if you read Lama Zopa, Lama Yeshe, Sonsadala, they actually say that some practitioners just think that the wisdom side is more important, so they develop single concentration. They spend years in isolation developing their concentration, so they can actually focus their mind on one thing for as long as they like. That's called shamatha. And insight meditation, they can apply that concentration to the way things exist. But without compassion, they say they can't become fully enlightened. So they may be able to become arhats, So this is becoming, it's a state of nirvana, bliss, but it doesn't, it's not, according to the Mahayana tradition, there's still some more purification to do to become fully enlightened. And so if those arhats want to actually become fully enlightened, they have to actually start again and use compassion, bodhicitta, to combine with their single point of concentration and wisdom realizing emptiness. Remember, Mama Zopa said this at the retreat I went to a year or two ago. I was quite shocked because I always thought that if you develop this perfect concentration and become an arhat in that tradition without the bodhicitta, then you could just use bodhicitta and just flip into enlightenment. But Rinpoche said you've got to actually go back and use compassion right from the beginning. So that actually makes sense as to why all these the teachers actually saying right from the beginning we should be using bodhicitta. It's the most important practice. So it allows us to, we make no progress without it, and allows us to proceed quickly on the path. You become a child of the Buddhas. That's a nice thing to be called, child of the Buddhas, which is another word for a bodhisattva. So Rinpoche points out that if a person has this quality of spontaneous concern for other beings, just letting go of the self and thinking only of others, letting go of self-cherishing is the way he always describes it, self-cherishing as being the enemy, then they become a holy being, surpassing an arhat, surpassing the person who's achieved that perfect concentration. So he explains how these beings can be in our midst but not be obvious. They could be the person who's a bit crazy, very poor, the beggar. Could be somebody who's renounced the worldly comforts. Could be somebody who's a millionaire as well. They don't necessarily have to be unattractive or not enjoying the worldly pleasures, but if they have this mind of enlightenment, they're holy beings. If I can just quote a few lines from Ramazopa. This is Shantideva. Shantideva is a credible teacher who was at Nalanda University in India during the sort of golden era of Buddhism, when all the great teachers and scholars were at Nalanda, northern India. So he used to stay in his room day and night, never come out much, didn't teach at all. So they called him a very unkind name in Sanskrit, I forgot what, but actually it meant eats, sleeps and goes to the toilet. And that's all, that sort of very derogatory term they used to describe this person who was obviously a Buddha. So just to they wanted to get rid of him at night because he seemed to be just taking up space. Just eat, sleep and go to the toilet, never did any teaching, didn't show any sort of sign of scholarly attainment. So they asked him to teach in front of the whole university, thinking that this would be a good chance, he won't be able to teach, he would be able to expel at the university. So they gave him this opportunity. Apparently they built a chair that was so high that he couldn't get up onto it. To make a fool of him. But what happened was he flew up to the top of the chair and started giving the most unbelievable teachings. This is what the book that is called, it used to be called The Bodhisattva's Way of Life, and I think now it's called The Way of the Bodhisattva. So that used to be, I think it was one of the really first books translated in English to Mahayana texts. When I went way at the Bodhisattva way. It's quite small, but I remember when I went to Dharamsala, it would have been early 80s, for doing the Buddhist sort of circuit. That, I think, was the only book in English. There might have been some others at the Tibetan library, but that was the main one, solid all the bookshop. So now, of course, we've got commentaries and other books. But anyway, Shantideva, this is a quote from Lama Zopa Shantideva. He said, even though we're still trapped by delusions in samsara, fettered and weak in the jail of psychic existence, the very second we attain the mind of bodhicitta, we become a holy being, to be revered by all. All other human beings and higher samsaric gods will prostrate to us and admire us, no matter what our external appearance might be. Bodhisattva might be penniless, filthy, a beggar in torn rags, dirty matted hair, might be a hippie, skinny and dirty, shunned by everybody, looking and acting completely crazy. They might have leprosy and be a despised outcast, but very second the person to emerge bodhicitta, they're considered holy being, object of veneration, surpassing even an arhat who has realised emptiness and removed all gross delusions. So, in a text called The Jewel Lamp by Kunu Lama Rinpoche, bodhicitta beautifies the appearance of the face, bodhicitta lends beauty to the wideness of the eye, bodhicitta gives beauty to the sound of the voice, bodhicitta makes behaviour beautiful. So, things couldn't be better if you're a bodhisattva. You're outside spiritual practitioners. So there's another interesting story in Rinpoche's book, I remember, about how spirits can hinder our practice, even though we can't see them. And teachers like Lama Zopa talks about them quite a bit. Some spirits can be very powerful. And he even said that some high geshis in Tibet, if they didn't combine their practice with bodhicitta, they could have a mind that's very powerful but quite vicious, quite unkind. And sometimes these they come back as spirits and interfere with practitioners who are trying to make progress on the path. But he said, the person who's got bodhicitta, the spirit can feel the compassion of that bodhicitta, their compassion for the spirit. The spirit's not a happy being. And they allow, they prostrate or they help that the bodhisattva. They don't interfere because the power of that bodhicitta. That's an example of the power of bodhicitta. Okay, so I just won't go through them all one by one because they do overlap quite a bit. Become a supreme field of offering. So quite often Tibetan teachers talk about St. Francis of Assisi. Lama Yeshe used to talk about St. Francis a lot, the Catholic saint who used to talk to the animals and incredibly ascetic, used to live in the country. The birds and animals used to love him. So Zopa says that here is an example of a bodhisattva that even the animals used to bow down to and take notice, and it was calm. I think there's an example where a lion or a wolf, that's right, a wolf was going to attack. He'd been attacking the village, and the wolf confronted St. Francis. It actually just went and licked his feet. There's miraculous stories. So the Bodhisattva is not exclusively Buddhist. It cuts across all races and all religions. Compassion is in every religion. Maybe not to the extent of the Bodhichitta teachings in Tibetan Buddhism, but certainly it's there in all. It's the essence of all teaching, all religious traditions. The Dalai Lama often points that out. So it's very easy to accumulate merit, very easy to, merit being accumulating positive mental qualities. Things that we get when we make offerings is often called merit because it's very good for the mind. If we make offerings to holy objects, circumambulate stupas, and so on. So these practices, prostration, rejoicing, good way of getting merit, rejoicing in other people's good deeds or compassion. So this is Bodhichitta's one of the super quick ways to accumulate merit. There's probably no equivalent of the word merit in psychology, I don't think. I wish I'd studied psychology, but I don't think there's anything quite like it. It's often used to they use the word of, before you plant the plants in a garden, you've got to actually get the soil in good condition, put some fertilizer and mulch in and get it, ready to plant the seeds. So that this is what merit is often said to be like, preparing the garden, levelling the garden. Okay, accomplish whatever you wish. So the doors open, things become much easier because you've got the Buddhism Bodhisattvas are all on your side if you're practicing bodhicitta, compassion. Soon complete the entire path. Even hearing about bodhicitta fills us with joy. So it can be quite, as against listening to the teachings of the hell realms, which we have to hear about. I remember the first teaching I went to in Kopan, I think Lama Zopa spoke about the lower realms for many, many days. Before he spoke about bodhicitta came later. But the bodhicitta lifted us up and started teaching those teachings. You still have to know about the hell realms because that's different level of suffering. So that helps us to inspire compassion when you realise that there are beings in that incredibly suffering state, low suffering state. Okay, so just thought that there's the two main methods for practicing compassion, the 7-point cause and effect. That's the one where we start with seeing all beings as our mothers, probably the one that I think I was taught first. And then, so that involves accepting reincarnation, that if we've had infinite rebirths in the past, then every cat's just walked in, everyone, we've been in the different relationships, all possible relationships with all beings, mothers, fathers, uncles, aunts, sisters, brothers. So that's one of the things we have to accept. And then if they've all been our mothers, the mother's usually being the most caring person towards us in this life, then we accept that all other beings have been our mothers at some stage. So then there's a lot of teachings on what the mothers do, what hardships they go through, bringing up their child and so on. And then we generate the wish to repay them. And so repaying them is to help their suffering. How can we help their suffering? We have to become enlightened so that we can lead our mother being out of suffering. But that's the 7-point cause and effect. And then the other one is equalizing and exchanging self for others. And so it said, I didn't realize this, but just when I was reading the notes, said that that's actually more advanced practice, equalizing self for others. It's for a more advanced practitioner. 7-point cause and effect is slightly for people lower capable beings. But Lam Tsongkhapa put the two together and made them into one practice, which is probably the one that I have read most about, I think. We used equanimity to start off with, seeing how equal we are to all of the beings in the sense that we all suffer, we all want happiness, we all are in this cycle of birth, death, rebirth, and so on. And then from there, realizing everybody's in the same situation basically, then we realize that we're just one, we're countless number. So we develop the idea that they are more important than this one me, looking after myself, and so on. We build on that. So thought it would be good tonight to do the meditation on equanimity, which is the basis for all the practices on Bodhichitta. And so just give a little bit of background to that. Any questions so far? Comments? No, there's nothing on the screen. Just having a quick look at the notes before we start that. I sort of skipped over quite a bit of the stuff on page 2. Right. So the other thing is, Rinpoche keeps stressing that we don't have to wait to become a really high practitioner to start on the practice of Bodhichitta. Just checking our motivation in everything we do can actually turn the everyday things that we do, work, even sleeping, eating, and so on, into a virtuous action by thinking that this is for the benefit of others, and having a selfless motivation. So this turns what could be either a neutral activity or a negative activity, if we're doing it for our own satisfaction, as self-interest, into virtue. And so he gives the example of even the wish to relieve a sentient being of their headache, the most minor sort of ailment, is a bodhisattva's state of mind, wishing to relieve suffering. And so if we're helping somebody do their shopping or something, we're doing it for that purpose, to benefit that being. He said it's possible to do all physical actions that are on the surface, helping others, helping the people who are sick, and helping our parents and so on, but actually not having that motivation. So we can just transform everything we're doing into the virtue, which is practice. So we're actually day and night accumulating positive mental state, proceeding along the path. So the Bodhichitta, as you know, this wanting to help, wanting to make progress on the Buddhist path. So we can use the selfless thing at all different levels of practice. We can use remember the lower capable being wants to have a rebirth rather than becoming fully enlightened. He just wants to have a good rebirth in the next life so that they can continue with its practice. So if you continue with your practice in order to develop bodhicitta, you turn that lower capable being's practice into virtue, into a very high practice, much more powerful practice. And the same with the middle capable being, and then the higher capable beings as well. Okay. When we keep bodhicitta as our main practice, we can be sure that we are obtaining the most meaning from our lives. So this is just what, again and again, we hear this from all the teachers, particularly Lama Zopa and others. Okay, so just this practice of equanimity we do quite often in our dropping meditation. And Lama Zopa has really good version of it in this book. Goes equalizing self and others. And he actually has a whole chapter on it, which I've only just discovered just recently. But so basically what we do is we visualize in front of us friend, enemy and stranger. So the three sort of loose categories that we usually put people into, mostly would be stranger, because that's the vast majority of them. But the people who are closest to us will usually be in the friend or enemy, people we see every day. So it could be our relatives, friends, so on. So the usual, the normal being who's probably not practicing, or even if they are practicing, will have this instinctive reaction to people who have helped them. It's that could be their close relatives, partners, friends, people who they've got something in common with. So that person's friend. Then the person who makes them feel uncomfortable, perhaps has hurt them in the past, enemy, don't like that. So we hold on to the friend, we push away the enemy, and then the other one, who's the person in the street, the vast majority, millions and billions of others, we don't really have much, they've neither helped or harmed it, so we don't take much notice. We don't really think about them, even though they're the vast majority. So it's said to be, but beneath all that is that we're just looking at what they do for us. The friend is the helper, the enemy or the difficult person is the one who's helping or is hindering or harming, and the other one is doing nothing. So we have these quite what is said to be very superficial and hallucinated type of categories. So they're just these friend, enemy, strange. They're just concepts. Rinpoche says it's conceived by a deluded mind, and they appear to be permanent. Like the friend appears to be 100% friend, enemy 100% enemy, but they're not, because they change. So in the practice, we line them up, and then we feel what we feel towards them, and then we go about why do we feel so strongly that person's a friend? Okay, and then we try and think, have they always been a friend? Could that person become an enemy by just saying something or doing something that's really offensive to it? And if we go back, there's histories in our relationships where we've actually experienced all these things. The person's gone from friend to enemy. Could have been gradual, but they change. They're not 100% friend. Same with the enemy. Could be the person who we married and then we get divorced and we can't stand to look at them. They've actually changed completely from being 100% friend and 100% can't stand, can't look. So these things, if we look deeper, the labels are not coming from the side of the person, they're coming from our mind. So, so then we how flimsy these categories are, and then we think of this is not going to be all happen in one session, but some of the things we can think is that we've got in common with them. The categories are artificial; they're all in our own small, infantile way of thinking. But thinking big, we depend on sentient beings for everything we do: our food, our clothing, all comforts, all our computers and everything. Our parents brought us into the world. Every sort of thing that has helped us is from other beings. Then we think the abbreviated, all the other beings who have helped us are all suffering like us. They've all had losses of loved ones. They experience aches, pain, sickness. They're getting old like us. They have all these ups and downs just like us. So they experience all the three types of suffering. So the more we understand suffering, the more we can feel that common humanity with them. They also want happiness, but they don't get it like us. So they all need help, equal in needing help. They're equal in wanting to attain happiness, and they're also equal in being tormented by the delusions. So remember those three: karma and afflictions. And of the afflictions, there's greed, hatred, and ignorance, the three big ones that pop those, just like we do. Okay, so we just sort of spend seeing what we've got in common and feeling what we've got in common. That's basically it. We don't take it to wanting to the compassion stage yet. That's just the practice so far. just feeling common humanity. Okay, so that's basically it. Probably we've done the meditation, so we don't, okay. Now we'll do it more formally. We'll do it properly. Okay. Just look at my notes. Okay, so get comfortable, sitting, lying, whatever's the most comfortable position. And start with a few moments of breath meditation. We can actually just remind ourselves, motivation is doing this practice to develop the mind of enlightenment, great compassion. Okay, we start now with visualizing 3 people in front of us: friend, enemy, and stranger. The friend is the loved one, the person who we trust, could be a child, relative, partner, friend. Could even be a pet. Feel the warmth towards that being, the natural. First of all, just feel the spontaneous mental reaction when you think of that person. The natural feelings of warmth and friendship. Now we come to the difficult person. Just think of them in front of us, looking at us, and noticing our reaction, our first reaction: uneasiness, uncomfortableness, not wanting perhaps to look at that person or think about that person. And then someone who we have no particular relationship, the person in the street, in the bus, in the train, the shops, someone we see in the street. They've neither helped or harmed us, and we don't have any particular reaction to those people, the stranger. Noticing that. Now we come back to the friend, feeling that sense of natural concern and trust, warmth. See only the good characteristics there, no negative characteristics. Has that person always been our friend? Were they once a stranger? Can we imagine that person not being our friend? Saying or doing something that displeases us? Perhaps this has happened to a friend in the past, but suddenly the relationship has changed from friend to enemy or someone we don't want to see. Just remembering that this relationship is very much based on our projections, not permanent. There's no intrinsic friend there. That person was once a stranger. Perhaps could become an enemy. To some people, that person would be an enemy, but I like it. Now looking at the person who makes us uncomfortable, the enemy, thinking why is that person like that, something that they've done to harm us or offend us. Hasn't behaved the way we expected them to. Perhaps hasn't helped us the way we wanted. Is it because that person hasn't met our expectations? Can we imagine that person becoming a friend by helping us, changing, take a kind of look? This might have happened to previous relationships we had. Someone we didn't like becomes a friend. You see a different side of that person. There's no inherent enemy there. To some people, that person is a lover. The way we see that person is our projection, our mind, hallucinated mind. Now, the stranger category covers almost the entire population. The friend probably came from that category, the enemy came from that category. The stranger has neither help or harm. But like the friend and the enemy, the stranger wants only happiness, doesn't want suffering. Just like us now. They will have the right to happiness as we do. They are equal in needing help as we do. They all suffer as we do. 3 types of suffering. Then thinking of the way these beings help us, all sentient beings, friend or new strangers, particularly the strangers, thinking of our food. We don't grow our food, but we eat. Thinking of the bowl of rice on the table, coming from the kindness of other beings and the suffering of other beings. Or the insects that have died, cultivating the rice. Or the hard work done by the beings that have grown the rice, harvested the rice, taken the rice to them. Beings who Soul of our strength. Without kindness for sending things, we have no fear. Same with clothing. Suffering of the animals, insects, and cotton food to produce the cotton. The sheep, the wool. The cows, the leather, the shoes we wear. Being to make the clothing under incredibly difficult conditions. Other countries exploited for their labour. Very harsh conditions. Little or no pay. Exploitation. Thinking of how we are beneficiaries of countless other beings at work, toil, labour. How that sense of appreciation, gratitude, the help from another being, common humanity, appreciation of those kindness of those beings. Opportunity to practice, even whatever practice we do, thinking of patience. We need somebody to challenge us. We need the enemy to practice patience. We can't practice patience if everybody's nice to us. Without patience we can't develop compassion, loving kindness, we can't become enlightened. Saying that compassion, loving kindness, we need other beings with which to practice patience, loving kindness. So coming back to the friend, enemy, stranger. Sometimes the friend is a friend and change to an enemy. Someone's friend is someone else's enemy. Someone's enemy is someone else's friend. There's no never changing friend, enemy, or stranger. Only the mind that creates. Feeling that sense of equanimity towards all beings. Our labels are just our hallucination. All beings are deserving of our concern, our loving kindness, our compassion. They all want happiness, joy, love, suffering, just as we do. Feeling that common humanity, that bond, equanimity. So we can just dedicate any positive merit from this meditation and our session tonight, and all the positive merit we've accumulated in the past, we'll do in the future towards our development of equanimity, loving kindness, compassion, and bodhichitta. Only with bodhichitta can we proceed along the path to full enlightenment. Only with full enlightenment can we help other beings fully, completely. So I'll just read Lama's special dedication during the coronavirus, due to the merits of the 3 times collected by me. Numberless Buddhas, numberless sentient beings, may all wars or sickness, famine, torture, poverty, and economic problems of the world, all dangers of earth, water, fire, wind, be pacified immediately. May perfect peace and happiness prevail in everyone's hearts. May the Buddha Dharma last for a long time, and may sentient beings in this world meet the Buddha Dharma and achieve enlightenment as quickly as possible. Dedicated to that. Okay, thanks. That's it. I'll just say goodbye to the people out there. Thank you for being there. Hope to see you next week, same time. Have a good week. Stay well. Funny having